Alright, so welcome to episode 3 of the barn door build. Last episode, I got it up on the frame jig, roughly in position. This episode is strip everything off the body. So I started with removing the doors. Now the doors on these go on with a countersunk Phillips head screw, and they can be very difficult to get out. First, the heads are all rotten on them. Sometimes the impact screwdriver will take them out. I didn't have any that would start with the impact screwdriver. So I started off just welding a bolt to the screw, and the heat cycling of that, plus having a bolt you can put a wrench on, I was able to get most of them out. But I did have one twist off in every single tapping plate. Not a big deal, because I'm going to be taking everything apart and removing the tapping plates, so I may need to make new tapping plates anyway, depending on their condition. But if they are good, I can easily remove the twisted off bolts. When I got back to the cargo door, this one where the bolts are actually inset into the body, I just drilled them out. I figured I'm going to have to change the tap plates anyway. It's easier just to drill through the heads so that the heads snap off. So I did that for those. And the driver's front door I also drilled out. It was just easier than trying to weld on them. I also run out of argon for the welder, so yeah, drill was easier. So once I had the doors off, I had to remove the windows. So the old window seals were so rotten, it was just easy just to cut around the inside of them and let the windows pop out. This window back here, the rear windows are actually pop-out windows. So they have a hinge with 5 screws and then a pop-out latch in the back. Those screws are very small, countersunk flatheads. 2 of them come out, the other 2 I had to drill. When I restore the window frame, I'll have to weld on those and take them out, which is a bit of a delicate thing to do. And they're taking the windows out and realize that the body metal is actually quite good around the windows. So in the back, I started by removing the spare tire tray. All the bolts started, which was nice. The tray itself is in quite bad shape. The front section is pretty good. It just is, where it's rusty, where it's not. So, which means this metal here is in really good shape. Now we can remake this. I can stamp the shapes into metal and reform it. Quite a bit of labor, but these are quite expensive, so you can use quite a bit of labor before it makes sense to buy a new one. So the fuel tank, next, bolts also started on that. Fuel tank was in worse shape than I expected. I didn't know what it was going to be like. It had a spout welded on it, the extra one, and the original one was cut off. So I need that. The top section here is rotted bad, and then the bottom on both ends is quite rusty. The actual bottom here is actually still good and solid. It's probably fixable with labor. I could also build a new one. It's not terribly complex in its shape. May purchase one. Again, they are fairly hard to come by. I would like to fix it if I can, but it'll require removing the top and bottom half and seeing how thick the metal is everywhere. If it's good in most of the areas, then I can replace the thin parts. But if it's all thin, then it's just not worth fixing. So the rear hatch, it screws on to a tap plate. It's inside this section. This part rusts really badly because the water sets in there. So that's all going to be replaced anyway. I'll have to make that all new, the tapping plate and the structure there. The hinge itself is in bad shape, and that's welded directly to the engine cover. So I'll have to replace the hinge. It's not worth trying to fix. The engine lid itself is actually in pretty good shape. Once the bottom section of metal is replaced here, and a little bit of the ends of these structures, the rest of it's not too bad. There is some warping across here. It's not as bad as I thought it was. I think I can actually shrink the metal and get it perfectly flat again. That actually was from fire damage at some point in its life. So it still has most of its original wiring. Obviously, it'll have to be replaced because it's corroded. But the nice thing is I can actually see the routing On a vehicle like this, when you're stripping, you have to make sure you're very careful to document where everything is, because there's not a lot of information available for these, and there was a lot of changes through the years. So being able to look at and track where every connection was, where the wires were crimped and run, what they all look like before you take it apart. So when I go to rebuild it, I'll have to build a new harness from scratch. I can see the wire colors, I can see the type of the crimps, I can see where they're run exactly, and how everything's attached. And that kind of goes for a lot of the details of the bus. Before I remove anything, I'll take good photos and measurements and make sure that everything is can go back exactly like it was when it was new. So up here, I started by removing the steering wheel. You have to use a puller on them. They don't come off easily, and you will damage them trying to tap them off. I had a puller I used for my 64, and I had to modify it slightly because the barn door hub was a little bit bigger, but then it worked fine. All the bolts started on the bottom, so the steering column was able to come out. The steering box actually is in very good shape in this. There's no play that I could detect. So I think this may have been a low mileage bus. So, because everything I've taken off it and the steering and stuff, it's been almost perfect. So once the steering column was out, took the dash pod out. It just goes on with 3 bolts on each side. A pretty simple setup. The deluxe model of these buses has a dash that went straight across, bolted in, but all the standards and the commercials all had just a single pod. So I had to cut the wires for the fuse block. They're pretty simple. There's not a lot of wires on these, but I did take photos to document everything so that when I go to put it back, I can get everything exact. So the pedals on the floor and the emergency brake lever, I'm going to wait until I have the body off to give me better access there. The brake and clutch have a pin that goes through, and I haven't tried it yet, but it might be a little hard to get it pushed through. So it might be easier with everything removed here to get in there and get it out without damaging the pin. The emergency brake lever also has a pin. They tend to rot in. I may have to cut that one and put a new pin, but I'll try to free it up first, just to keep the original one if I can. So I was able to remove the catches for the doors. They're little small flathead screws, but with the impact screwdriver, I was able to start them and then work them back and forth to get them out. Same with the grab handle on the bulkhead and a few other parts. I was able to get those screws all out. So I also removed the door rubbers. The door rubbers on these are just a single profile that's just bent around. The profile is different from top and bottom of the door, and they join in 2 sections, and they're notched in such a way to match up with the shape of the door. So I documented that, took some good photos and measurements, so when I put my new rubbers in, I can cut them and notch them to replicate what the original ones were. The metal actually in back of the rubber is better shape than I thought. I thought it would be quite a lot rustier back there. So I removed the windshields just by cutting the back of the rubber and popping them out. Discovered there's quite a bit of rust in the back of the frame. That's very common. The way they're made, the water doesn't drain. It sets in there behind the rubber. It slowly rots away. I knew I was going to have to change this metal anyway because it is rusty on the outside and bulged around the welds on the seam. So that's no big deal to actually replace that whole piece. The upper frames are actually in really good shape. The metal's still good there. There's a lot of the original paint is still on it. So I pulled the front bumper off. The brackets are actually in quite bad shape. They've been bent and rusty. The bumper that was on, it wasn't original to the bus. It was off a Dove Blue bus. You can see how the brackets are. These are actually supposed to be straight, and they're quite twisted. And they're also, of course, very rusty because it's 2 pieces of metal. And then they rusted and swelled in between. So I'm going to have to replace these. I may just cut them and replace the metal going out and reshape this piece, which is probably most likely. I could buy new brackets, but I prefer to fix if I can. The bumper itself is still in decent shape. There's no rust in it. It's bent from abuse, but that's no big deal. This stuff straightens out pretty easy. Although it's quite time consuming to get it perfect because you really don't want any body fill in it. Notice by removing the front bumper, we expose the metal valance here, which is another pretty normal thing to have on these. It's basically a box. There's an inner piece and then the outer piece. So I guess that about wraps up this video. Next video, we'll be removing the upper body, just leaving the frame and the floor structure. If you're interested in seeing that, please subscribe. I'm going to add a bunch of raw video to the end of this for those that might be interested in the smaller details. Thank you.